I am Christian von Carmian, and I was minding my own business, good, gotta get a pun in there in the first few seconds, when requests came in to analyse the Host of Ascension. It is not quite the same as the Ascension Day Index Detachment. The name is slightly different. Oh, and some other stuff that means it plays almost totally differently to the Index, apart from, we want to come from below. So I will explore the best tactics we can use with this detachment, explaining the rules, ranking the Genestealer Cult units in a tier list, and giving you some example army lists which you can try as they are if they seem fun, or modify them to better suit your collection if, for example, you don't own 173 cultists. This is the most basic detachment, and unlike the others, you don't have to hyper-focus on a few units to get it to work. The Outlander Claw can put units in those transports, Biosanctic Broodsurge has some flexibility through which units the Biophagus is assigned to, and Xenocreed is flexible because it works around the battle line core of the army. But the Host of Ascension is shooting units and combat units. There is something for everyone, but if you want all shooting, you may be better looking into the Brood Brothers Auxilia. Maybe. If you just want to charge, consider the Biosanctic Broodsurge. The detachment rule gives you sustained hits and ignores cover when you are set up as reinforcements. Deep Strike, Strategic Reserves, Cult Ambush markers, all of these are example of your unit being set up as reinforcements. Units disembarking from transports are not reinforcements, unless they are disembarking from a transport at the start of the turn in Strategic Reserves. This bonus lasts until the end of your next fight phase, so the bonus lasts longer than you may expect. Here are some examples. You deep strike in your turn, in your shooting phase, and in your fight phase you get it and then it ends. So that's suitable for combat-loving units if you can get the charge. If you arrive from a Cult Ambush marker or by rapid ingress in your opponent's turn, if the enemy charged you, you have sustained hits and ignore cover when firing Overwatch, and sustained hits in the enemy fight phase. Let's say the enemy all died in their own turn. Good, they deserved it. In your coming turn, in your shooting phase, you will have sustained hits 1 and ignore cover, and in your coming fight phase, you will have sustained hits 1. Cult Ambush is specified as a type of strategic reserves, at least this version. You can't trust the FAQ as it appears in January 2025. That hasn't been properly updated and has been superseded by the balanced data slate of December 2024. I find these things so that you don't have to become a legal practitioner or an academic aiming for a PhD to find where all the rules are. Cult Ambush is a kind of reserves. Deploying out of Cult Ambush means you are set up as reinforcements in the reinforcement step of your movement phase, or if you use the Cult Ambush markers, the reinforcement step of your opponent's movement phase. Here are some tactics to consider for this detachment and any army that's using it. Because the bonus works in the fight phase and the shooting phase, this is a good beginner detachment that will get you used to how Cult Ambush works. Unless they change it again. And introduce you to how fun it is to play an army where most of your units have Deep Strike. I know a lot of people will ignore this detachment as essentially Index version 2, or not the one with the big hammer smashing, but it is a great place for Genestealer Cult players with a mix of units. All the Genestealer Cult units will receive my expert analysis in this video. You can have up to half of your army in reserves of any kind at the start of the game. This rule is in the Pariah Nexus mission deck, and even if you don't have the cards, because they are still hard to find, most people play with this rule. If you're using the White Dwarf Bunker Mission setup rules, that also says no more than 50% of your army in reserves, and the points of those units cannot be more than 50% of your army. Same as the Pariah Nexus cards. The core rules have no limit on reserves like Deep Strike, and 25% of your army cap on strategic reserves. So if you want a fun game with everything in reserves at the start of the game, you can. But I will be operating under the assumption you follow the 50% limit of combined reserves and strategic reserves. Yes, the terms are confusing. Strategic reserves are reserves, but not all reserves are strategic reserves. Put simply, abilities that let you deploy off the board at the start of the game, like Deep Strike, are reserves. Units that don't have Deep Strike that you choose not to deploy and save for later, those are strategic reserves. However you play, a max of 25% of your army points can be in strategic reserves. When deploying on the table, you follow the related rules. Deep Strike explains where you can be set up, or if using strategic reserves, page 43 of the core rules. But if you come from Cult Ambush, you are in Strategic Reserves, but don't have to use the Strategic Reserves deployment limit. Page 8 of the rules commentary, another document, and that page number may change as they add and change things in the rules commentary, you can set up using Deep Strike even if you are arriving from Strategic Reserves. I have realised that things like this are why the Genestealer Cult are a hard army for beginners to grasp. So when your units are set up, you get sustained hits and ignore cover. Up to half your army can start off the board, but actually it may be more because our Primus can exceed the limit. Bluff. If you want a quicker game, put your 173 cultists in a bucket and pour them over your opponent's models. If all their models are entirely covered by your models, you win! Let's have a look at the stratagems to better understand the detachment before we really get into unit analysis. Return to the Shadows. It is not the same as the index version. You go back underground if the enemy shoots you. Keep reminding your opponent that you can do this. If they plan to shoot some of your Objective Control 2 infantry and then charge in to take the objective, by going underground you deny them that charge. It isn't like the index where you do this at the end of the enemy fight phase, it is in their shooting phase and you will take damage. However, you can use unit abilities like the cult icon while in reserves and regenerate some of those losses. If the enemy uses pistols while in engagement range, or if you're shot by a tank while in combat because of the big guns never tire rule, you can go underground afterwards. But the enemy won't shoot you. Haha, you fool! You fired the one bolt pistol on your Repentia superior, and now I get to return by deep strike later. That feels very Genestealer Cult, but that sort of, haha, you didn't know all of the rules. We don't do that on this channel. You warn your opponent that you can do that if they fire the bolt pistol, and it is up to them if they want to do so or not. Maybe they think they are costing you command points. You never have to use a stratagem. Tunnel Crawlers is a fun one. It can be used from Cult Ambush. It loses the second part about 3 inches after the December 2024 balance patch. This is the only way to get your demo charges in range when coming from Cult Ambush or Deep Strike, as demo charges are 8-inch range now, a balance that came in at the same time as Tunnel Crawlers was modified. It isn't just for demolition charges. You could get a load of neophytes really close to the enemy just to block them from moving as far forward. If the enemy is 12 inches from an objective, instead of being an easy charge to take the objective, now you are holding the enemy up and they can't get through to score victory points. Cultist lives are there to be spent. You can climb on them and metaphorically pile your models onto theirs to get victory. If they shoot you, we return to the Shadows, so you don't need to lose the neophytes, but all the same, we have denied the enemy the chance to move in the movement phase. It doesn't have to be as complex as organising and calculating blocking enemy units. Get your neophytes closer to have more autogun, shotgun and seismic cannons in rapid fire range. Or if you have mostly been prevented from deep strike by enemy units, the enemy is unlikely to stop a 6-inch deep strike. Get in there and score victory points. This is for your movement phase only, so no combining it with cult ambush markers or rapid ingress. Whether or not you have demolition charges doesn't matter. Use the grenade stratagem as a follow-up. That has an 8-inch range on them, but that is spending another command point. If you have a nexus in the unit, maybe. But primed and readied may be a better follow-up. Primed and readied works for shooting or combat. Obviously shooting is easier as it isn't further dependent on making a charge roll. This doesn't require coming from reserves, but obviously that is what gives you sustained hits, which triggers off successful critical hits. You could have lethal hits on a 5+ all of the time on a unit with a Biophagus or Benefictus. A Biophagus unit charging from reserves, we have an enhancement that helps with that, explained soon, and that is some impressive lethal and sustained hits now on a 5+. As these are critical hits, there is another great aspect. We can't fail by rolling a 5. Neophyte mining lasers and seismic cannons normally hit on a 5+. If the enemy has stealth for -1 to hit, a critical 5 is still a successful hit. The Space Marine Gladius Task Force lost this on their Fire Discipline enhancement because of how awesome it was. Be glad that we still have it. Coordinated Trap is another stratagem, but it's 2 command points. There is rarely time to use it when there are so many other good stratagems like Primed and Ready, which does the damage. It's a nice combination with the crossfire ability rules explained in another video. If you can boost the AP of shots against one target with a Ridge Runner, it is also a powerful combination. This ability is also called Crossfire, please don't get confused. But I would only use it when you have a Nexus in one of the units to reduce the cost. Having a Nexus in either unit lets you reduce the cost. You reduce one of the stratagems you use by 1 command point if you have such a character like the Nexus. Lying in wait lets you get close to an enemy from a cult ambush marker. It's like tunnel crawlers but from a cult ambush marker. If the enemy was within 9 inches of the marker, it would automatically be removed. I've never been able to use this stratagem, but if the enemy had completed a move from reserves, that doesn't remove the cult ambush marker if the enemy ends within 9 inches of it. That's in the Genestealer Cult FAQ. But if you set up 6 inches away in the enemy turn, they are going to shoot and charge you very easily. The extra limitation is this is battle line units only, so you can't pop up with a tough wall of aberrants. A deadly snare is a stratagem that gives you more reliable damage than Overwatch if you don't have hand flamers. Against tough enemies it is better, and this can be used if the enemy charges without having line of sight. Overwatch needs line of sight, Deadly Snare doesn't. One Genestealer Cult infantry unit that was selected as the target of a charge doesn't have to be successful, just has to be declared. You roll a d6, on a 2 to 4 that enemy unit suffers d3 mortal wounds, on a 5+, that enemy unit suffers 3 mortal wounds. By causing casualties and the enemy taking off closer models, this could cause a charge to fail. And it's good against vehicles, monsters and elite infantry that you would otherwise struggle to kill. This is a detachment that doesn't so much avoid combat as doesn't like combat when it's not our turn. Hurt the enemy for daring to charge, and if they move closer to charge, we have an enhancement to play Keep Away. Nick their stuff and play Keep Away, or as the enhancement is actually called, Prowling Adjutant, is a reactive move. The enemy makes a normal advance or fallback move within 9 inches, you get to move d6 inches. You can't use 2 surge moves in the same phase, but you can prowl closer to the enemy in their movement phase, and then move again with a metamorph unit doing brood surge in their shooting phase, perhaps to get into combat with that second move. Or you have a speedy reactive move with the Jackal Alphas on top of their existing ability to move after shooting, so you move in your shooting phase and move again in the enemy movement phase. That's a lot of movement. Neophytes like it to stay out of combat where they can shoot with more than just their pistols that everyone forgets that they have. Or you could reactive move more bodies onto an objective marker. But really, the enhancement you're always taking is a chink in their armor. You get lethal hits and sustained hits when you come from reserves because, the detachment rule gives you sustained hits. This ability gives you lethal hits as well. You are taking this enhancement. If you use the Host of Ascension, you include this enhancement. And remember, you can have both lethal hits and sustained hits triggering on a 5+ to hit from Primed and Readied, included on a Primus for full rerolls to hit, and oh my, that is a lot of lethal hits and sustained hits. If you can get shot and return to the shadows, going underground and coming back up will give you an additional use of this enhancement. It is each time the bearer is set up. In an Acolyte unit, probably only an Acolyte unit, though expensive, you could double up on characters, and the other characters could help you get into combat with the charge bonus from Our Time Is Nigh. Then you keep those lethal hits going through your shooting phase and into the fight phase when you are set up from reserves. Our Time Is Nigh is obviously the combat-oriented enhancement. You get +2 to charge. Very tempting from Deep Strike, but I kept failing the charge. It is useful when getting out of a truck. If it was on an Icon Ward who can scout with the Metamorphs, you scout 6 inches, disembark 3 inches, move and then charge with a one-off +2 bonus. It is not as good as the Xeno Creed Advance and Charge with rerolls to the Advance Roll and the Charge Roll, or all the bonuses you can add to charge rolls in the Biosanctuary Brood Surge, but this is a useful enhancement. Deep Strike and then charge through ruins. If the enemy can't see you, they can't shoot you with Overwatch and you can charge enemies you cannot see. Assassination Edict feels like the smaller sibling of the Xeno Creed's Denunciator of Tyrants. +1 to hit against character units instead of +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Lots of units are characters. Big Imperial Knights, any attached unit that has a character because you share keywords in attached units, and those lone operatives that zoom around being pests, are often characters, but also the cheap characters that players field alone to score victory points. It affects all the models in the unit, not just the character model the enhancement is on. This is an ability that is always on, not just in the turn or battle round you is set up as reinforcements. It works with combat, it works with shooting. Alone, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you use it on a massive neophytes, that's a lot more shots, and if the shots had an extra armor penetration from the Ridge Runner, or you use Assassination Edict as part of a Flamer and Demolition Charge Acolyte unit using Tunnel Crawlers, Demo Charges are now hitting on a 4+. All 4 of these enhancements are great. I wish we could take all 4, but you can never take more than 3. Now, rather than looking at the tactics for just reserves and how they work, how do we play this army? You're going to want a lot of the army to start in reserves. Lots of them, maybe half of them. Certainly the damage dealing units. You don't have much on the board at the start of the game, but don't worry. You can't usually score the primary mission in the first turn. Maybe you get some secondary mission points. But you are planning to strike turn 2 with most of or all of your reserves. That is the good turn, the fun turn. The turn that wrecks the enemy and sets you on track for victory as the surrounded and confused foe is being decimated. This is the cool ambush Genestealer Cult detachment. Then you spend the rest of the game making up the points while your opponent tries to regroup and deal with your units. Secret missions are another good comeback option if playing with the Pariah Nexus mission deck. You can partly ignore the primary mission until later. If you wait until turn 3 for the big strike, then it is often too late. It isn't awful to have a unit or 2 in reserves in turn 3, but that's when they've got to arrive. Big Neophyte combo strike should be turn 2. Big Acolyte with demo charge strike on turn 3 when you can use primed and readied again and also have more command points. That can work. The big turn is command point intensive, so save up for it. You want primed and readied and tunnel crawlers. Maybe also coordinated trap if you can. And a Nexus can help reduce the command point cost. When it comes to picking the damage dealing units, I would say at least half of them should be shooting units. This is a detachment about shooting and can generally do combat as well. It can be shooting only, but it can't be combat only. Then you have one enhancement that's really good. 2 extra inches bonus to charge, but only once per game. And because you get the detachment bonus when coming from reserves, it's a 9-inch charge most of the time. That's going to be difficult for your combat units unless you use rapid ingress. That's more command points you're spending, which leaves fewer for things like primed and readied. So it is much easier to activate with shooting units. And then you also get the ignore cover bonus. When the Genestealer Cult Codex came out, a lot of the damage output of the Genestealer Cult was removed. The Xeno Creed can advance and charge, they can get there, but it is harder to hurt the enemy. The Outlander Claw moves fast and takes objectives instead of doing flat damage, but even the Biosanctic Brute Surge can't stack it like we used to. The Host of Ascension can. The enhancements are great, the stratagems are very good, they work with the core of the army, and it's pretty flexible on the units you can take. You can inflict a lot of damage on tough enemy units. 20 neophytes with all the trappings, the mining lasers, seismic cannons, heavy stubbers, grenade launchers, flamers, webbers, sustained hits and lethal hits, and full rerolls to hit with a Primus, who has the chink in their armor enhancement, and you're coming from reserves, and an extra armor penetration from a Ridge Runner. Most enemies short of a Titan will die, and you are able to figure out what you can kill using the Adept Roll app. This will show you all of the bonuses you can do, and there is also a fish for critical hits button. You can set it to fish for 5s if you are also using primed and readied. It's a clever app like that, so that you can see what happens when you reroll the 4s that would be successful, or 3s if there was another character in that unit who had Assassination Edict and you were targeting a character, like a big Imperial Knight. Against a big knight, you can see that 20 neophytes have a 60% chance of destroying that 22 wound vehicle. I like those odds. You can tell me the odds. And you can figure out if primed and readied is necessary or how losing it affects your chances of killing the enemy. You can download the app for your own games using the link in the description. You could also use coordinated trap for +1 to wound, but that would limit you to target only one enemy. You don't need to limit yourself to one big threat. Overkill is common when the mega investment unit shoots. If you split fire and wipe out or heavily damage a lot of smaller units, that can be better. Lots of intercessors and sternguard have become more common in the recent meta. The meta will change, but that is an example. If the enemy doesn't have as many units to complete missions, they don't score victory points. Eldar players will be far more annoyed if you take out a unit of Rangers and a unit of Guardians and hurt some Aspect Warriors than if you destroy their avatar. The avatar cannot wipe out 20 neophytes in one go, but the other small units could. I have fired a single seismic cannon at 3 Tyranid warriors, no other reason than I was in half range and I got 2 more shots against them compared to firing alongside the rest of the squad at the non-assimilated Tyranid monster. The one seismic cannon killed all 3 Tyranid warriors. I expected to kill 1. Obviously, these were not the Star Gods. The Star Gods would not look so horrible or die so easily. This is the one time you will want to split fire. But causing damage is what this detachment does, so it can be quite a different playstyle to the other detachments. It makes your basic troops really powerful. And what it does as a secondary tactic is the usual Genestealer Cult waves of bodies to slow down the enemy. When your units come back through Cult Ambush after dying and passing through the local government recycling initiative, they don't have characters, so they won't benefit from enhancements. A lot of the magic combo is gone. They have sustained hits when they arrive again until the end of your next fight phase, but they won't have any lethal hits. You may still be able to use the Ridge Runner to boost the armor penetration, and primed and readied for sustained hits on a 5+. They are still really good. The Xenocreed detachment can advance and charge, Biosanctic Broodsurge gets +1 to their charge roll on Aberrants and Pure Strains, but they suffer more from the loss of leaders. The Xenocreed loses rerolls on the advance rolls and the charge rolls, the Biosanctic Broodsurge loses the force multiplying and usually enhanced Patriarch and Abominant, and if there was a Biophagus, now the returning unit won't get the detachment bonuses or access to the Stratagems. The Host of Ascension is only mildly inconvenienced by the death of their leaders. You lose enhancements, but that is about it. Bring back the Neophyte units big and small with your resurgence points. Acolytes with hand flamers and demo charges can use tunnel crawlers, as it says in the FAQ, to set up on the board in your own turn if returning from strategic reserves via deep strike, and this new unit has new demo charges to throw. Pure Strains returning through Cult Ambush markers have the speed to get back into the fight and have sustained hits on their many attacks on the turn they arrive from the ambush marker in the enemy turn until the end of your next fight phase. I like being able to get back in to do damage with my returning units. It is time for a tier list. I make a new tier list within each detachment video as the power of every unit changes depending on the detachment they are in. Think of the Repentier from the Adeptus Sororitas. Great in Penitent Host, okay in Hallowed Martyrs and Champions of Faith, but poor in the Army of Faith and pretty abysmal in the Bringers of Flame. Yet they cost the same number of points regardless of detachment. This is part of why 40k can never be a balanced game, and it's why a tier list for the whole army is very difficult without thinking of detachments. In this tier list, I will talk about viable tactics for each unit relating to the detachment, so that if you have a small collection, you don't get told, oh, don't take this unit, but instead you get told, here is what you can do with them, but why they perform poorly in the detachment. I'm going to start at the bottom with the worst performing units, the D tier units. The Icon Ward. With the Icon Ward you can scout and then charge with Our Time Is Nigh on Metamorphs, but that is spending points to be able to scout and also have a character with an enhancement. A Locus has Fight First, and with +2 to the charge distance that can work better. Or you don't add a character, and then Metamorphs can scout. That is a tactic that is better in the Xenocreed Congregation detachment that supports the Icon Ward and gives alternate enhancements just for them. The Magus doesn't add anything great. Enemies may be at -1 to shoot you in the enemy shooting phase. That can reduce the amount of damage that you take, but if there is some damage, we can return to the shadows as long as we have the command points. The Magus is not the character to take. They rarely are. And this is your monthly reminder that the Tectonic Frag Drill exists. There is little more to say about it. As a fortification, it can't come from reserves, so it can't even get the detachment bonus. In C tier are the less valuable but still usable units. There are Aberrants. They make for a good distraction, or another scary distraction to keep the enemy from killing your neophytes, which are your main damage dealers and also your main point scorers. My problem with Aberrants is twofold. If you have another type of profile, aside from lots of neophytes and lots of acolytes with their 1 wound, low toughness and a 5+ save, it means that attacks from the enemy that are damage 3 or higher have a great target. If your army is all light infantry, apart from say Ridge Runners, you can ignore enemy anti-tank guns and prioritize killing their point scorers and units that can mow down infantry. As a damage output unit, I prefer metamorphs. The aberrants can do the same tactics as metamorphs. The detachment rule lasts until the end of the fight phase, giving sustained hits. Our time is nigh on a biophagus will help them make the charge, primed and readied in the combat phase for lethal hits and sustained hits on a 5+. But metamorphs have more attacks. 5 each to trigger those sustained hits and lethal hits, or 3 damage to attacks, the same number as the aberrants. The strength difference doesn't matter too much when lethal hits are in play. Oh, and 10 metamorphs costs only slightly more than 5 aberrant, so metamorphs give you twice as many attacks on their higher strength profile or more compared to aberrants. The individual lone operatives don't have massive value in this detachment. A small number of neophytes or acolytes can do the same job, and by being on the board, they have a larger 9-inch range to prevent enemy deep strike than a single model. So the Kellamorph isn't doing great. With the Sanctus, you could come from reserves and with their sniper and target their prey with the Psychic Spoor, then you reroll the hit roll to try and get a 6 for 1 extra shot from sustained hits 1. But they don't have the volume of fire that is needed to get enough critical hits. A Reductus Saboteur can slow down the enemy a bit as they approach your empty looking side of the board and don't really want to step on a planted explosive. Or the Reductus Saboteur could be a good target for tunnel crawlers if they have Assassination Edict. Then your demo charge will hit an enemy character unit on a 2+, and you can throw grenades for free beforehand. The remote explosives will also benefit, as a good counter to indirect fire is that +1 to hit. But acolytes with demo charges will be a better unit for about the same points to have their force multiplied, as there are more demo charges and a small unit can return through Cult Ambush. A Reductus Saboteur doesn't have the Cult Ambush army rule. Much as I love our god, the Patriarch is C tier. They make pure strains better as they provide devastating wounds. What would be better in this detachment is more pure strains to hold up the enemy in the first 2 battle rounds. You could arrive with 10 pure strains and a Patriarch with rapid ingress, and then advance and charge to have a lot of attacks with sustained hits and devastating wounds. I can get behind that. The enhancements are not of great benefit to the Patriarch. +1 to hit from Assassination Edict is near worthless on a unit that hits on a 2+. Our time is nigh is not needed on a speedy unit that can advance and charge, and a chink in their armor to have lethal hits is not a good combination with devastating wounds. Any attack that auto-wounds because of lethal hits won't be able to become devastating wounds. Jackal Bikers can be a blocking unit as they scout, but pure strains are cheaper and have infiltrate and an invulnerable save. The Jackal Bikers demo run requires you to be within 6 inches, so you can't use it after coming from reserves, and as the bikes don't have deep strike, they can't use tunnel crawlers. Rapid ingress is an option, but for the number of shots you're getting, neophytes provide twice as many shots. A Goliath truck can transport units, but we want to come from reserves. The truck could be in reserves and deliver a small neophyte unit or 10 acolytes with hand flamers and demolition charges, who will now be getting sustained hits and full rerolls to wound when they disembark and shoot the same thing that the Goliath truck did. After that, the truck can be a bunker to hide more units or transport them to objectives if their recent target has been destroyed. Those full rerolls to wound can be complemented with a Primus to have full rerolls to hit as well, or a Benefictus to also have lethal hits. It is tempting. It is more damage. However, Deep Strike is already paid for with the units. Although you could be on the table with the truck to start with, and instead have more neophytes. Boosting those 10 to a unit of 20 will be a better use of the points. As a means to transport a combat-loving unit safely into battle, it works just as well as in any other detachment. They have a use, but I generally give them a miss. The Rock Grinder is in a similar position when it comes to transporting units. It has a bigger gun, like a heavy seismic cannon or heavy mining laser, that would like the sustained hits alongside any models shooting from the firing deck, and if you rapid ingress to have more chance of making a charge, the Drill Dozer Blade can benefit from more attacks from sustained hits. But that is likely to be one more hit. Transport tactics can work in any detachment, but this isn't their detachment. Moving on to the B tier units. These are good units. I recommend taking these units. They are sometimes overshadowed by their A tier alternatives. If you have an army that's entirely B tier units, it will still be a good army if you know how to use the army well and you follow good tactics. B is for Benefictus, and I have the same feelings with them as the Demo Charge Acolytes. This is the only detachment where they shine. The Benefictus is really expensive. It adds lethal hits to a unit without needing to have a chink in their armor enhancement, so that's useful. It means you can have it on more than one unit. Sustained hits from the detachment rule and lethal hits gives you a powerful unit of 20 neophytes. Or you could add the Benefactus to an Acolyte unit with hand flamers. The demo charges have Hazardous, as does the Benefactus Big Brain Blast. Because of the weird way Hazardous works, you could drop a demo charge Acolyte instead of the Benefactus, even if the demo charge Acolyte didn't fire or had already used their demo charges. And the Benefactus still has a very silly ability that hasn't been changed more than 6 months after the Codex launch. Once per game, they can boost their own invulnerable save ever so slightly. If you are thinking, we have established that lethal hits are great to have in this detachment, why is the Benefactus B tier? Is it just because the name starts with a B? What? No. No, for 10 points more, you get a Primus. You want at least one Primus for the decoys and misdirection ability, but full rerolls to hit is wonderful all of the time. Weigh that against a las cannon profile shot or two from the Benefactus. Still a good character in this detachment. The Nexus. I keep mentioning the Nexus. There are so many good stratagems and combinations of stratagems that one Nexus for cheaper command points is worth it. However, there are other ways to get command points. Acolytes can generate it with their mining ability, and you don't have to do much in the first turn, so that is 1 or 2 command points generated potentially for your big turn 2 strike. You can discard secondary missions to get another command point. But the Nexus is a good character to have, and another one you can put enhancements on if you just want the enhancement. The Abominant is a great character all the time, on their own, whenever. They can complete secondary missions and they are hard to shift. Our Time is Nigh is optional for them, if or when you want to charge in, which could be immediately after arrival. That big hammer is good at smashing tanks, heavy infantry like aggressors, or assassinating lone characters. I like a big hammer lady. I'd less like the Clamavus, but they are in the same tier. You add them to a unit of neophytes or acolytes with auto pistols and mining lasers that have a valuable role in keeping your half of the table from being hit by enemy reserves, which will prevent you from placing your own reserves in the same place. With the Clamavus having a 12-inch radius for 25-inch diameter, including their own base, that prevents enemy deep strike and reserves, that gives you a near guaranteed safe place for your own reserves to appear. If you can't place your reserves, you can't really play Host of Ascension. So against some enemies that have a lot of reserves, you can't guarantee going before them, so you may then need to put a lot of units on the board at the start of the game, or a Clamavus to prevent those deep strikes. The Jackal Alphas is a good B tier unit, separate to the Jackal Bikers. This is a shooting detachment and the Bike Sniper can add another buff. Reroll hit rolls of 1. They are cheaper than the Primus, but their reroll is not as good as the Primus. However, this will work on multiple Genestealer Cult units if you were going to have several Acolytes or Neophytes target the same enemy. Sadly, the Jackal Alphas dies easily. They have stealth, but do not have lone operative. They can shoot and move out of line of sight. That's one way around it. And they could be with Jackal Bikers, which can move, shoot, move again. For a combat strike, I recommend Metamorphs. Adding Prowling Adjutant to a character joining Metamorphs works okay. It's extra movement to get them close to the enemy, and you usually fight before the enemy if you move into them using a surge move. Or potentially, tunnel crawlers to be 6 inches away from the enemy, and with auto pistols, you are guaranteed to surge 6 inches. It's hard to pull off and requires fighting around an objective, but it is possible to get into engagement range on the enemy turn. Have a Locust with them so you can fight first even if you are charged. So the Locust is a B tier unit. They could be on a unit deployed at the start of the game out of line of sight, so it almost has to be charged. And there may not be a lot of other units on the board at the start of the game, so that's what the enemy will have to go for. Fighting first really messes up combat heavy armies like Orcs, World Eaters, Space Wolves, and so on. When combined with Acolytes with mining tools who are generating command points on an objective, there is your good defensive unit. Or you could Rapid Ingress, then you have sustained hits until the end of your coming turn, so if the enemy dares to charge you, you can really hurt them. And you will hurt them again with sustained hits if they don't wipe you out after your attacks. A Locust is the cheapest character to add enhancements to, like Our Time is Nigh, with or without Rapid Ingress. And they're great to just put on an objective. You mine for command points. Your opponent always wants to do more than one thing at a time with their units, everyone does. So they won't want to just destroy an enemy unit, they want to destroy an enemy unit and take an objective at the same time. This is why neophytes with sticky objectives are good. They have already moved on. The objective can be taken, but there isn't a unit to kill. With Fight First from a Locus, assuming they're with Metamorphs or Acolytes, your opponent is often not willing to charge your Locus and friends on an objective and will instead opt to shoot them and in the coming turn, move on to the objective. There are rare exceptions like Seraphim who can move close, shoot, and then hop over any survivors after shooting to get onto the objective and take it from you, but other units have to choose between getting cut up by mining saws and hoping to be alive to kill us, or lose time by shooting us, not taking the objective, and trying to take it next turn. Acolytes with mining tools are a good B tier unit, a good combat unit for this detachment, and one that can try and generate command points in the first few turns. They enjoy rapid ingress to get onto the table and charge in the coming turn with sustained hits on those mining weapons. As a combat unit with no real shooting, I put them in B tier compared to the Acolytes with hand flamers and the Neophytes. Guess where they are going? Pure Strains are good B tier units. There isn't necessarily much for them in this detachment, but they provide a wonderful screen. You can slow the enemy down from getting to your side of the board better than with Jackal Bikers. Not having space to deploy your incoming reserves is one of the biggest problems you can face with this detachment. Pure Strains can be a pain to get rid of, purely from having 2 wounds and an invulnerable save. They are fast, so if you go first, you can stand in front of the enemy and just hiss at them. Welcome to Genestealer Jail. This stops opposing units from easily getting out of their deployment zone, and so you have more space to set up your incoming Neophytes and Acolytes. If the Pure Strains were left out in the open at a crossroad between ruins, and the enemy had to charge you to wipe you out, this gives you many firing angles for your coming attacks, from other units like small Acolyte and Neophyte units. Or as I already said, Pure Strains rapid ingress, they rush from reserves, enjoy sustained hits, or don't bother with deploying in reserves. Choose the Pure Strains to come back through Cull Ambush. Use your resurgence points on them as they are likely to be the first units to die. Then you can keep up the pressure on the enemy in the early turns as much as possible. Coming from Cull Ambush markers, the Pure Strains can advance and charge a long way to get into combat, and because of the detachment rule, they have sustained hits. Lots of attacks always loves a lot more. Then the A tier units, the one I really recommend you take. If you have them in your army, take lots. Though not all units need to be taken lots of times. Like the Primus. It is standard to have a chink in their armor on a Primus, so that when he comes from reserves with Neophytes or Acolytes, they have lethal hits and sustained hits, and the Primus lets you reroll all hit rolls to get more. To get more of them, you reroll the successes to try and get more 6s that are both lethal hits and sustained hits. I mean, get 5s because of course you are using primed and readied on this unit. Neophytes are my preference and they make a mess. They can destroy multiple transports, kill monsters and infantry alike with the various weapons the Neophytes carry, all so much better because of the Primus, so take 1. The value of the Primus goes down after 1, you won't have a second character with chink in their armor, and only 1 can use the decoys and misdirection ability. You can start with up to 50% of your army in reserves, have as much of it as possible ready to get that detachment bonus. I would have at least some Neophytes on your home objective to sticky it from the start. Yes, the Pariah Nexus mission deck counters the core rules that says all of your army can be in regular reserves by Deep Strike, which is different to strategic reserves. I wish all the rules were together in one place so you could see all the versions that are all true and valid depending on how you're playing. The Primus is an extra exception who lets you put more units into strategic reserves than normally allowed. 3 extra units, so potentially your whole army could be in reserves at the start of the game, ready to come on turn 2 and all getting the benefits of the detachment rule. But be careful on that, it gives the enemy a lot of freedom to prepare, and if there is any 12-inch deep strike denial from them, we have problems. All of the Ridge Runners can start in reserves. For the Ridge Runners, I encourage mortars that can reach across the board to wherever a unit pops up, and then the Ridge Runners will support them with the crossfire rule from their card. The detachment already gives you ignore cover, so the Survey Auger is not as needed. The Flare Launcher is good to stay alive. Don't get shot. And yes, the Ridge Runner could come on from reserves. You don't need the crossfire rule until turn 2 anyway. So come from reserve and the Primus can set you over the normal limit and have a mining laser or mortar with sustained hits. You can get some great angles to shoot the enemy. Neophytes are A tier. This may be the only detachment where you want a unit of 20. They're great through tunnel crawlers to block enemies or claim multiple objectives. Through a chink in their armor and rerolls and primed and readied, lots of shots is best. So maybe no mining lasers, seismic cannons and heavy stubbers. You have lethal hits. You want 6 shots, not 1. Especially 6 lethal hit shots with AP -1 from a Ridge Runner. With large blocks, if the enemy can't kill you, charging in is painful for them. Fix bayonets if you want, ready cult knives, and then charge. 20 neophytes sitting on an objective, regenerating with the cult icon is difficult for most enemies to shift without concentrating their attacks. While a lot of people will see the chink in our enhancement and see that it combines with sustained hits from the detachment rule, you want to think a bit more to see this. Have a Biophagus with Acolytes or Metamorphs. A Biophagus will always have lethal hits. Yeah, the detachment rule lasts until the end of the fight phase, giving you sustained hits, so a Biophagus is a good choice for the Our Time is Now enhancement for +2 to charge. They don't have to be coming from reserves, though that is where a lot of people will use it. But primed and readied in the combat phase for lethal hits, and potentially sustained hits on a 5+, great. Unlike almost everything else in all other detachments, this stratagem has no limits. You don't need to come from reserves, it just works. I encourage you to have a mix of melee and shooting units in this detachment to get the best of it, and the Biophagus can lead the combat side. One of those units that is a good mix of both are the Acolytes with Hand Flamers and Demolition Charges. This is the only detachment where the Demolition Charges shine. You can make them really good through supporting buffs of Enhancements, Stratagems, and coming through Cult Ambush with Tunnel Crawlers, so you are in range to throw those demo charges. Their Demolition Charges are anti-marine or anti-elite rather than anti-tank. If you want anti-tank, you need the other kind of Acolytes with mining tools. So as a combo, 10 Acolytes will give you 4 Demolition Charges and the bodies to survive Overwatch and keep the demo charges and an icon alive. You get full rerolls to wound when attacking an enemy on an objective, so do that. A Primus will give you full rerolls to hit, and 4 demo charges with sustained and lethals because of a chink in their armor, on a 5+ because of primed and readied. It can still be made good, but when you've seen the investment required in points and enhancements and stratagems and know you are not getting the same bang that you were before, it does feel bad. But I'm okay with the toning down from the index. When the only tactic was to spam Neophytes and Acolytes, it quickly got boring. Neophytes with all that force multiplying goodness is preferred over Acolytes. So why are these Acolytes with Hand Flamers in A tier if there are better units? Well, Acolyte units do so much more. They can fit into small spaces, smaller spaces than you could fit 10 Neophytes to complete secondary missions on busy boards with hordes of enemies. Their Hand Flamers can kill light infantry very quickly. The demo charges are only one part of the unit. They don't need buffing up that much. Has that helped? I hope it has. It should give you tactical advice for ways to play you hadn't thought of and which units in your collection to include. The C tier units may be what you have and you want to play this detachment, so I gave ideas on what they can do within this detachment. What I have next for you is army lists. A 1000 point army list to start, because that is the size recommended by Games Workshop, and if that is as big as your army ever gets, that's okay. 1000 points is a lot of fun. I will read out the army list so you don't have to tab out of or pause your game. There is a Primus. They have a chink in their armor enhancement. There are 20 Neophytes, a Benefactus with Assassination Edict, 10 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, and that includes 4 Demolition Charges and a Cult Icon. There is a Biophagus, 10 Acolytes with 6 Mining Tools and a Cult Icon, a Jackal Alphas entirely by themselves, 5 Acolytes with Hand Flamers, though only 4 of them have Hand Flamers, 1 has an Icon, 10 Neophytes, a Ridge Runner with a Mortar and a Flare Launcher, and a Ridge Runner with a Laser and a Spotter. What you can do with this force is start everything off the board apart from 1 Neophyte unit. You will deploy the Primus and the 20 Neophytes together on the board, and the Benefactus and 10 Acolytes, and the Biophagus and more Acolytes, but then, with the Primus's ability, you can remove those 3 units into reserves. The enemy is now closing in on some apparently trapped neophyte models, and then whoop, ambush time. Even if the worst were to happen and the enemy was all over the table, they won't be able to block everywhere. You just don't have the models at 1000 points. If they have 12-inch deep strike denial, or can also deep strike all over because they are demons, then for goodness sake, don't put everything off the table before the game starts. So, worst reasonable case, you have to deploy in your own deployment zone because that is the only place there is space. But then, almost all of your army is getting the detachment bonus. If you had nothing on the board because those 10 neophytes were killed quickly, you don't lose. Even if everything dies, there is no rule in 10th edition that you lose the game. You could be entirely wiped out, everything dead, all resurgence points expended, and the victor is still determined by victory points. In this edition, you can no longer ignore the scenario the rules writers have taken the time to craft and say, I can't read, I just want blood. That won't win you the game, even if it's fun. The Primus will join the neophytes. Maybe when they arrive, we will use primed and readied. They're already getting sustained hits and lethal hits in a 6+. It depends on how much they can see. 1000 points can often be spread out on a big board, and the enemy may want to spread out to try and prevent you from deep striking. So there may not be a lot for the Primus and neophytes to kill, even if they're splitting fire. So primed and readied, it's a maybe. The Benefactus with Assassination Edict will go after the enemy character units. They will get +1 to hit on their own las cannon brain, so it will hit on a 2+. And with lethal hits from the Benefactus and sustained hits from the detachment rule, that supports the demo charges. They will want to arrive using the stratagem Tunnel Crawlers. If you were short of command points, that may be the only stratagem you use in your big attack turn. The Jackal Alphas wants to arrive in the same place to give that unit reroll hit rolls of 1. After shooting, the Jackal Alphas could move closer to a soon-to-be empty objective as the Acolytes wipe the enemy from it with their ability to reroll all wound rolls against enemies on objectives. The Jackal Alphas can't deep strike, so they would have to draw a line of sight to what the Acolytes can attack, or the Acolytes deep strike near to a board edge that the Alphas can enter from. An alternative to Assassination Edict on the Benefactus is Our Time is Nigh on the Biophagus. I can cope without it. If you go first, the Biophagus will rapid ingress on the enemy turn 2 to charge turn 3. If you go second, the Biophagus could rapid ingress on the enemy turn 3. Rapid ingress alone should be able to get you at least 2 extra inches on your coming charge. On the turn that unit charges, which should be turn 3, use primed and readied, sustained hits and lethal hits, if you make the charge. It is very satisfying to have smashed the enemy with demo charges and neophytes, and as the enemy tries to regroup, here is another problem they have to deal with. Going second, I could rapid ingress on the enemy turn 2 to be part of the big strike, but the line of sight blocking would have to be very good. The only units you have on the board at that time are the Acolytes with Biophagus and 10 cowering neophytes. Every enemy gun is hungry and waiting for something to shoot. The Ridge Runners are in reserves. The one with the heavy mortar will be there to provide crossfire and maybe nothing else. The Ridge Runner with the laser, separate unit, they will be in reserves to come on, and with their spotter they're hitting on a 3+, that is their ballistic skill, and they get sustained hits. Go for an elite unit, ideally one with at least 5 models, then you get an extra shot because of blast. Or you could combine them with another one of the attacking units, and then you are getting not only your sustained hits and probably lethal hits, you also get an extra point of armor penetration. This is a detachment about damage, so the army is constructed to provide that big punch of damage. The 5 Acolytes with hand flamers are there to kill small light infantry units. Usually on the home objective, where attacking them, you can reroll failed wound rolls. They don't have demolition charges because they will not be able to use tunnel crawlers on the same turn as the other Acolytes are using tunnel crawlers. Instead of attacking the enemy, these 5 Acolytes could start scoring secondary missions right away. It depends what cards you draw. Mission scoring is a task they will soon be joined in. After the fun turn where we do all the damage, the army splits into 2 different roles, each with a different task to complete. The Primus and 20 Neophytes and the Biophagus with 10 Acolytes keep the pressure on the enemy. The other units get onto objectives to get scoring victory points. The Alphas and the Ridge Runners can speed to different positions. The Ridge Runner with the mortar could be present in a table quarter or sitting on a far-off objective and still provide the crossfire bonus. The Benefactus unit won't have their demolition charges anymore, and the Handflamers won't benefit from lethal hits because they auto-hit, but the Acolytes are 75% Genestealer. They have 3 arms. Their claws are good combat claws, so that unit can go either way, shooting or combat or both. The 10 Neophytes are just there to sticky your home objective and maybe survive. Perhaps they can start doing some secondary missions if they can get to a mid-board objective. But really, they're a distraction for the first turn. When you're spending resurgence points, you don't have that many at 1000 points, but 10 Neophytes and 5 Acolytes is a good choice. It depends on what dies first. Whatever dies first, that is probably what you want to spend your points on. While the characters I've laid out are Primus with Neophytes, Benefactus with Acolytes with Handflamers, and the Biophagus with the Acolytes with the mining tools, they are a little bit flexible. You could have the Benefactus and Primus the other way around. Try it and see what you like best. The Jackal Alphas would still support the Benefactus' unit, because the Primus' unit rerolls all hit rolls already. This gives you a lot of damage very early on, it plays to the strength of the detachment, and it lets you have almost all of your army off the board if that is something you want. The more units that can have the detachment bonus, the more units are doing damage. Now let's look at a 2000 point army list, and do we have 173 cultists? You don't have to play at 1000 points or 2000 points. These aren't even the correct ways to play. The game isn't designed to only be played at 1000 or 2000 points. Play 1500 points, that is a good size army. But I've got a 2000 point list because I know a lot of people like 2000 points and 1000 points and fewer people like 1500. This is the 2000 point list. A Primus with, wouldn't you know it, a chink in their armor. And they lead 20 Neophytes. There is a Nexus, a Benefactus, 20 more Neophytes, a Primus with Assassination Edict, 10 Acolytes with Handflamers and also Demolition Charges, 20 more Neophytes, a Biophagus with Our Time Is Nigh, 10 Metamorphs, 2 squads of 5 Acolytes with Handflamers, optional Demolition Charges, an Abominant, 2 squads of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers, a Reductus Saboteur, 2 Ridge Runners with Mortars, 10 Neophytes, a Clamavus, a Locus, and 10 Acolytes with Auto Pistols and Mining Tools. We start with the reliable Primus with chink in their armor joining 20 Neophytes. Those Neophytes will have 2 Seismic Cannons, 2 Heavy Stubbers, 2 Grenade Launchers, and 2 Webbers. The Webbers are optional and could be Flamers instead. I don't take mining lasers in the Host of Ascension on the units coming from reserves because we want as many shots as possible to get the most lethal hits and sustained hits. 1 shot doesn't do it. 2 or 4 shots from a seismic cannon, or 3 or rather 6 shots from a heavy stubber is much better. The Nexus is in this unit. The Nexus could lead another unit of Neophytes, but they can double up with a Primus, and that is what we want so that even if you have 0 command points, you can make your best unit do a cool thing. Return to the Shadows to come back onto the board and get a second use of a chink in their armor, or have a free primed and ready for even more lethal hits and sustained hits. This unit takes on tanks, monsters, Primarchs, and the biggest of orc hordes. Another squad of 20 Neophytes are led by a Benefactus, again for that lethal hits with sustained hits when shooting. It's not as good as the Primus unit, but still very strong. As further shooting that doesn't have any additional bonuses and doesn't really need it, another 20 Neophytes. Just 20 Neophytes. They can remove smaller enemy units with their sustained hits but want to tackle light infantry, Imperial Guard platoons for example. You have units for every kind of enemy, and Deep Strike gives you great power to match them up to your benefit. Target priority will be enemy units that can take out lots of your infantry. Units like Aggressors, Infernus Marines, Gladiator Reapers. If you can kill them with your Primus and Benefactus units, you stay alive and outlast the enemy. The other priority is enemies that have high objective control that could challenge your infantry. Battle Sisters with a Dogmata is 30 objective control, but can be taken down by 20 unsupervised Neophytes. The 20 Neophytes can block enemies from moving onto objectives and can use tunnel crawlers to do so. If they die, they are not as big a loss. If there is an enemy with good overwatch, rather than putting Neophytes in front of them, send the Biophagus and Metamorphs to charge through ruins from out of line of sight. Remember, rapid ingress is an option. In the Host of Ascension, you can target specific enemy units you want to kill. You can go for one half of the army and clear a flank, which will severely reduce the enemy ability to score points from primary and secondary missions. This gives you board control. Your missions are easy to complete without harassment, and the enemy has the opposite. You choose what to go for depending on the battlefield situation and the enemy you're facing. The 10 acolytes with demo charges and hand flamers with a primus will arrive with tunnel crawlers and target a unit with a character, probably one of the enemy units that has force multiplying abilities, the enemy's own Death Star, and ideally something with a Space Marine profile. Assassination Edict gives the bombs +1 to hit, so they now hit on 4s, and the rerolls of the primus help those one-shot weapons to have more of a chance of hitting. If you wanted, you could switch out the primus for a Benefactus to have lethal hits instead of rerolls, much like we did in the 1000 point list, but then you may be better having more neophytes instead of the acolytes. It depends how many neophytes you want to buy and paint up. The final deep striking units are 2 squads of 5 acolytes with hand flamers who will complete missions. I would take a cult icon, but the demo charges are optional. 5 acolytes are not your priority for tunnel crawlers. They are assisted in their mission completion by an abominant. They are a pain to take down as you usually have to destroy them twice, and a big hammer can add more damage to a detachment that already plays by causing damage. But keep the Our Time Is Nigh enhancement for a Biophagus. It is better to get 10 metamorphs into combat to use primed and readied on their lethal and sustained hits, or at least their lethal hits, than it is to be more likely to get one abominant into combat. To get all those units into reserves, some will deploy on the table and then go into reserves. I would pick 3 units when doing so. That gives you 3 deployments of units that are not really going to be on the table, while your opponent deploys 3 that are going to be there at the start of the game. That gives you an advantage in information so you can deploy the rest of your army better. And that rest of the army has a few jobs. Holding the enemy army up before your reserves arrive to strike, completing secondary missions, and if you can, get rid of the small enemy units that take up space that would mean your reserves are pushed further back and may not be able to get the best firing angles. Enemy infiltrators and scouts, like Space Marine scouts, they especially need to be gotten rid of. Although we will be deploying 3 redundant units on the board, the first units we want to deploy are the Pure Strains and the Reductus Saboteur. They take up space in the middle of the board and stop the enemy infiltrators from starting there. Those 3 units will try and kill enemy infiltrators and complete any secondary missions on the mid-board objectives in the first 2 battle rounds. If there are no good missions, delay the enemy. Hold them back and give yourself that space to deep strike. The 2 Ridge Runners have mortars and spotters to be more likely to hit the enemy. They can give early game crossfire bonuses to help the Genestealers and crazy thought, but they can use their mortars to kill the enemy. Small scouting units like the Deathcore Krieg Engineers get unhappy when hit by 2 mortars, that second mortar having the crossfire bonus. 10 neophytes start on the home objective to use a plan generations in the making to keep that objective under our control even if we're not there. With the Clamavus, they move away, and then I would keep the Clamavus near enough to it so that it is within the 12-inch area that prevents deep strike. That should cover the whole objective marker aura, so enemies with deep strike cannot just land there and take the objective. The neophytes have long-range weapons, a heavy stubber, and a mining laser to contribute something to the early fight if it is safe. There's no point losing them if you don't have to, even though no one will care about a dead Clamavus. An alternate unit is 5 acolytes with auto pistols and mining tools to try and generate early command points, but I prefer neophytes with the planned generations in the making. To generate command points, I have acolytes with a locus. They are on the table, and their mere presence can scare enemies away from charging forwards. When your reserves arrive, having neophytes drop near to them leaves you with an easy heroic intervention from fighting first models. That is an army list that relies on the characters to improve the general chaff of the army into a true fighting force. Or 173 cultists! Forget all that force multiplying and just have more force. More bodies, assuming you have the paint and the money for all these models. The more bullets you have with sustained hits, the more damage you can do. And you were thinking, oh, he's saying 173 cultists like it's a silly idea, a running joke through the video. No, it is a totally viable idea that I'm suggesting. In addition to the 173 cultists, you get 3 Ridge Runners for crossfire support. It is an army list that will struggle against vehicle-heavy opponents. take out the tanks that can kill lots of your infantry, and then try and hold objectives by standing in front of the other tanks and gumming up their tracks with your bodies. There are few enemies that can kill 173 cultists. The Host of Ascension isn't my favourite detachment for flavour, that goes to Xenocreed. There is no easy comparison to Bladed Cog from 8th and 9th edition. Not in 10th edition, but Host of Ascension is the detachment I have the highest win rate with, something like 75 to 80%. I have a playlist of all the Genestealer Cult detachments I have made dedicated videos for and how to get the most from them, so your favourite detachment can be explored. If the set is incomplete when you are watching, it is only a matter of time before I learn enough to make a video on the next detachment. Have a deep striking day of 40k.